Welcome to today's presentation on asynchronous versus synchronous interactions and instruction. We'll be focusing on what the definition is of these two types of learning, as well as the similarities and differences between the two, and also how you can use both of these in your virtual setting. An important thing to remember about asynchronous learning and instruction is that the students do not need to be in the same virtual room at the same time. We can use chat boards, we can use wikis, all kinds of things to help the students interact with each other when they're not there at the same time or at the same place. Another big part of asynchronous learning is emails or blogs. Synchronous learning, on the other hand, the students are presented the information in the same room or same virtual room all together. We can use tools such as web conferencing to communicate information back and forth. It allows students time to get information, share with each other, and ask questions. As opposed to asynchronous learning, the instructor is live and they're able to present the information directly to the students and able to interact with the students. As we look at our quick comparison guide, we can see that both synchronous and asynchronous learning have active learning. However, the synchronous learning will have things like Skype, meeting rooms, and video conferencing. And the asynchronous learning will have things like email, blogs, and pre-recorded sessions that they will rely on to dispense the information and to hold discussions. In my own personal mini research study, I polled students in grades 6 through 8 and asked them which do they prefer. Do they prefer the live sessions where they can communicate with the teacher, ask questions, and communicate with other students? Or do they prefer the recorded sessions where they can work one-on-one with the computer instead of waiting on other students to complete the lesson? Most students prefer to have the teacher present and to be working with other students. In the second part of my mini research study, I asked students, what do you prefer, synchronous or asynchronous learning, and why? And this is their why answer. In synchronous learning, they said, basically, if they could ask a question of the teacher, that would be fantastic. When they can't ask the question of the teacher, it hinders their learning. So they preferred synchronous learning because they could reach out and they could talk to other students as well as ask the teacher questions. On the other hand, the students who preferred asynchronous learning said their biggest thing that they could do was go to the class when they were ready. They could pause and they could rewind. If they missed it, they could see it again. So the recorded sessions worked out better for them. Both asynchronous and synchronous learning have some advantages and disadvantages to them. One of the big advantages of asynchronous learning is students are able to move at their own pace. That was reflected in our student survey that we just saw. They also can move through more quickly if they feel like the lesson is going too slow for them. One big disadvantage is a feeling of isolation. They're not able to interact with other students as much as they could in synchronous learning. It also takes more time to process the information than you would find in a face-to-face setting, which is more of a synchronous type of learning environment. Advantages of synchronous instruction include the ability to motivate the learners to keep up with their peers. They're going to see what other students around them are doing, and they're going to want to keep up with them. The teacher can also provide some immediate feedback and help pace the instruction. However, a disadvantage would be a student who might need some more time or is struggling with the lesson would have to really push themselves to keep up and might have some gaps in their learning. You also will see a lack of quality in responses as opposed to quantity. More students will give more responses more quickly rather than think about a quality response. One important thing that we've learned about synchronous versus asynchronous instruction is what's reflected here on our chart. 99% of the sentences that students used in an asynchronous class dealt with content-related information. So most of the time when the students were discussing things in an asynchronous class, they're focused on the content, both in a smaller class size and in a larger class size. We also can see that in a synchronous classroom, the students use more sentences focused on planning of tasks, and social support. In discussing what they need to do, what they've done in their classroom, they focus more on those kind of conversations than the asynchronous class focuses on. And remember, there's always a time and a place where asynchronous learning will be better and a time and a place where synchronous learning will be better. It's important that we look at the when, why, how, and examples of how we can use this type of learning effectively. So, what will the future hold with online instructions? Will we completely eliminate brick and mortar schools? Will face to face sessions only be offered for our younger grades until they get to know how to use the computer? How will synchronous and asynchronous effects of e-learning change your school? Our keynote speaker will be giving us more information about synchronous versus asynchronous instruction. Hopefully, he'll be able to answer a lot of these questions and much more. Thanks so much for your attention.